Hey, what's going on, everyone? GoodMicWork Commentaries back at you with another classic pay-per-view review. I wasn't sure at first if I was going to be able to give you guys a classic review this month because I'm trying to organize my schedule for WrestleMania season, and I want to make sure there's a bunch of cool videos coming to you guys on my channel for that time of year. So wasn't really sure if I was going to be able to squeeze one in here in the month of February, but after looking at everything, I definitely wanted to set aside some time to review at least one pay-per-view because, as we know, the NWO is slated to go into the Hall of Fame at this year's WrestleMania in Tampa, so I thought a perfect pay-per-view to review this month in February would be the show that they debuted in the WWE on all the way back in 2002. So that's what we're here to talk about today, WWE No Way Out 2002. This is a pretty historic show because it was the first time that Hogan, Hall, and Nash had set foot in a WWE ring in many years. We were right on the other side of the invasion angle, and there was just a lot going on in general. So that's really what we're going to talk about today. We'll go through the matches and talk about the circumstances and, like I said, what was kind of going around in the air around that time, because I have fond memories of all of this. I attended the Survivor Series just a couple of months prior to this in Greensboro when the WWE defeated the Alliance once and for all and the invasion angle was over. I was also at Raw the next night when Ric Flair came in, setting up the deal with Vince McMahon that eventually led to Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, and Hulk Hogan coming back into the company. So that's kind of what this pay-per-view was really built around, the return of those guys to the WWE and coming in as the NWO. So very interesting time, and a ton of stuff was going on. Before we dive right into this pay-per-view, though, a couple of really quick favors. I will make this fast. Number one, please subscribe. If you're here and you're not a subscriber, please stick around. You will like me. I'm up here doing reviews all the time. We have a great time on this channel. Awesome community, awesome group of listeners. It is a blast. So I hope you stick with us and make sure you sub. Also, smash that like button. Right now, with YouTube and the way everything is, I've never needed the likes more. So if you guys could really hook me up with that, I would appreciate it, and I will mail you a whole bag of cookies in the mail. Just email me your address. Also, please follow me on social media. Number one, Twitter. That is where you can find primarily all of my wrestling opinions. I always have things to say on Twitter, and if I don't have time to come up and do a video on anything, you can probably find my thoughts over there. I've got a Facebook page as well. Please give that a like, and this review will also be available in podcast form. You can download it over on my website, GoodMicWorkCommentaries.com, or you can find it on the podcast sites like Stitcher Radio, Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, and others. So you can find me everywhere, but YouTube here is my primary platform. So once again, please subscribe. All right, that's out of the way now. Let's talk about this pay-per-view. We've got WWE No Way Out 2002, went down on February 17th, 2002 from the Bradley Center in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Now, the official attendance for this show is 15,291, although Jim Ross announced the attendance on the pay-per-view and announced it at 15,235. So they're like 70 off there. Not sure what that's about. Not sure what the accurate number is. Doesn't matter. Anyway, like I said earlier, this show was mostly built around the return of Hall, Hogan, and Nash to the WWE as the NWO. You had big matches on this card. World title main event. Chris Jericho versus Stone Cold Steve Austin. You had The Rock and The Undertaker on the show. Triple H's WrestleMania title shot was on the line against Kurt Angle. This was a pretty stacked card, but still, this whole thing was just about the NWO. And I can tell you from experience around this time, I remember being really kind of like intrigued and freaked out about the NWO coming in. It was so surreal to me because we had just finished up with the invasion angle. We had to run that whole angle with nobody on the WCW side, but yet the minute that angle ran its course, then Flair and Nash and Hogan and Hall and guys like that came in. Sure would have been nice to have them around for the invasion angle, not to mention Triple H, who was on the shelf with an injury, not to mention Benoit, who was on the shelf with an injury. So the whole invasion angle just really sucked, but now that it's over, you start having more of those WCW names coming in. And I remember when it was rumored that they were going to be coming in, being like, oh my God, is the locker room going to reject them? I mean, a lot of what they were talking about on TV was reality. These lines were really blurred here between fiction and reality because these guys did have heat. And there were a lot of members of the WWE locker room that did not want them coming in. I think JBL and a few others famously kind of pushed back on that. And we're like, look, these guys better not come in here and start pulling that shit that they did in WCW. And it turns into one of those situations where the inmates are running the asylum. They had just a shit ton of just bad feelings all across the board because of how, much they did to help destroy WCW. It wasn't just Hall, Nash, and Hogan's fault. There was a lot of factors at play there, but they did not have a good reputation, to say the least, behind the scenes with a lot of the boys. And, and I remember being kind of like on the fence about it, like interested in NWO coming in because I was always a really big Kevin Nash fan. Still am. Always a big Scott Hall fan. Hogan, I was only so about back when I was a kid, but as much as I wanted to see them back, I was also like, look, when WCW was killing them in the ratings and Bischoff and Ted Turner were doing all these little dirty tricks to, destroy the WWE, they had to work their asses off to create new stars like Rock and Stone Cold and Kurt Angle and Edge. They made something of Chris Jericho when he came over there. They did a lot to help build their roster pretty much out of nothing, create all of these stars until the point that they were bigger than the stars in WCW, and WWE was once again on top. Now you're going to bring all those guys back, and potentially take away from all of the stars that you helped or that you created in order to combat these guys. So it was a very interesting time and a very interesting situation, and it became apparent right off the bat, right after that sale was made and WWE purchased WCW, that the business was never going to be the same again. I mean, these were the dying days of the WWF initials as well. This was February. By the time they got to May, it was WWE. So this was a really interesting time, with the NWO coming in. And one thing I will say about the NWO is I thought the setup was brilliant. Vince McMahon and that over-the-top Vince McMahon character, he is so distraught, dejected, and he's going completely batshit insane over the prospect of him having to be 50-50 partners with Ric Flair. That was what was revealed the night after Survivor Series or whatever. They worked together at the Royal Rumble, and because Vince can't get over that Flair has got the power he has decided that he's going to kill his creation because Ric Flair will kill it, but Vince worked so hard to create the WWF, he's just not going to let anybody else kill it. So he cuts this big crazy promo. We all remember it. Very famous promo backstage in front of a mirror where he's talking about injecting the WWF with a lethal dose of poison. And if anybody's going to kill his creation, it's going to be me. And then he spins his chair around to reveal the NWO written on the back. I thought that was really well done, and I thought Vince's over-dramatic and embellished acting really contributed to it. That's the one thing about Vince is he's so weird sometimes, and he's so over the top, and sometimes he oversells things so much, it's part of what makes it great. When Austin hit him with that very first stunner in Madison Square Garden, we look back at him flopping around like a fish in a very negative way. Everybody says that he sold that thing like a complete fucking idiot, and he did, but still, when you look back on it, I almost wouldn't have it any other way, So when Vince is just like, I'm going to inject, and he's spitting, and his face is red, and he spins the chair around to reveal the NWO, I thought that was well done. And I remember going into the show, I ordered it on pay-per-view. When they were leading into the show, I remember on TV being like, what the hell are we going to see? When are we going to see it? I thought they would come out last. I thought they would come out midway through the show, but they opened with the NWO. And I remember being at home watching this pay-per-view that night, being surprised that they were opening the show. Like, oh my God, I kind of sat up in my chair. I'm like, this is it. This is a huge deal. For me as a fan, this was a big deal. I always had a lot of sadness in my heart for certain guys that left WWF. One in particular, the biggest one was probably Macho Man Randy Savage that I don't think I ever got over. I remember watching Raw that night when Vince made the announcement that he was gone, and then him turning up in WCW. My heart sank. I felt like I lost a pet or something. I just had that feeling like, oh, my dog died, like that just horrible sadness. And it was kind of like that way for Hall and Nash as well, because I enjoyed the Razor Ramon and Diesel characters, and I didn't want to see them leave. So this was kind of a big deal for me to see these guys coming back in, because I was always such a big Hall and Nash fan. And now Hogan was never a big fan of him either, but I was not minimizing what this meant for him either. This was the first time that Hulk Hogan was going to step inside of a wrestling ring in 9 years, since King of the Ring 1993 when he lost to Yokozuna. That was a long time. You know, I went from being a teenager to being in my early 20s during this time. So that feels like a lifetime when you're that age. So to me, this was very surreal. It was very cool and weird and made me nervous, but excited at the same time. And that's a feeling that I just can't explain or describe to the younger audience that might not be old enough to remember how significant things like this were. And when they opened the show and that NWO music hit and those three guys made their way to the ring, you know, and Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler are kind of shitting on them the whole time, and they get in the ring and they're very kind of subdued. This didn't have, one thing I noticed right off the bat here when they showed up is that it did not feel like WCW. You know, it just felt like a little bit more intense environment when they were in the ring in WCW. This was a WWE ring in 2002. It really didn't feel the same. I thought the guys looked too clean. I mean, their NWO shirts were sparkling white. You know, they were brand new. Hogan was all perfect looking and everything. It just didn't look as, I don't know, maybe as gritty or as dirty as it did in WCW. But each guy gets their opportunity to speak. Nash starts things off and he acknowledges the fact that they've got a ton of heat in the locker room. And he tells everybody that they're not there to harm the WWE. He says his feelings are hurt because the fans think that the NWO is a poison and a cancer. And Nash just goes on to say that he wants them to have a fair shake. That's all he asks for. And then Scott Hall speaks next. He does the hey yo thing, which got a huge pop, and I marked out for. Scott Hall said they're just there to have a good time and that they're all marks. He actually said that they're all marks. They're just fans, and they just want a chance to work with all of the great WWE stars and meet and hang out with them and have some beers with them, which is kind of interesting because Scott Hall, I don't think, was drinking beer around this time. And then finally, we had the man speak. Hulk Hogan grabs the stick next. You know, like I said, I wasn't the biggest Hogan fan, but I appreciated this moment. This was a pretty big deal. They really wanted to cheer for him. We would see what he would go on to do at WrestleMania and then turn babyface and win the title and the whole thing. But here, they were really still trying to put Hulk Hogan over as a just dirty, asshole, terrible influence type of heel that you don't want on TV or behind the scenes. He's nothing but a troublemaker, asshole, and nobody wants him around. I mean, Jim Ross was really hammering that home to the point where you could hear it in his voice. I mean, Jim Ross, that's why I said it's reality and fiction, you know, blurring together here. Jim Ross, I think, had some, you know, animosity and some reservations about these guys coming in as well, because he was doing his damnedest to put them over as evil. But Hogan goes on to say pretty much the same thing that Hall and Nash are, and he says that they're not there to kill the WWF. They're there to make it better. And then he goes on to thank Vince McMahon. Says, thank you, Vince McMahon, for the opportunity. He says, God bless Vince McMahon and God bless America. And Jim Ross is not buying it. Jerry Lawler is not buying it. And the fans are kind of not sure what to think. So that was your opening promo, and that's it. So I remember at this time, I remember being disappointed in the promo. I was marking out just for the visual of it. Like, wow, the NWO was in the ring. But I didn't feel like they gave us anything. I didn't feel like we could tell what they were going to do yet. And if they were there to be the NWO from WCW, they've already failed at that. You know, like the NWO, I just envisioned them with baseball bats and attacking everybody and taking over the announce desk and doing all the crazy NWO shit, you know, but they didn't really do that here. They came out all humble, and it was just a weird way to see them. But, you know, it was all a ruse, as we would find out later on in the show, and we'll get to that when we talk about the main event. But I still think that moment was pretty significant for those three guys coming in at the same time. Can you remember when three wrestlers came in together that were stars of that magnitude? Never, because Hulk Hogan trumps everybody. You can't say the Radicals, Eddie and Benoit and Dean and Perry, were all awesome, but they weren't Hogan, Hall, and Nash. So for those three guys to be signed together and come in, that is just an incredible, you know, amount of talent and history coming in, and one of the biggest and most successful wrestling angles of all time. Plus, you know, Hall and Nash were there as previous gimmicks, Razor Ramon and Diesel. to see them back in the ring was really surreal. And of course, Hulk Hogan, the fans would feel about the same way I did, because they would start really getting behind him during his build with The Rock and everything going into WrestleMania. So that situation would take a lot of twists and turns along the way, and it's unfortunate that the NWO would never really do much in the WWE. I mean, I know we're looking way ahead here, but after WrestleMania would run its course, Hulk Hogan would turn babyface. Scott Hall would get fired after the plane ride from hell. They would bring in the Big Show, Booker T, and Shawn Michaels to be a part of the NWO, and then it was gone. So, I mean, the NWO never really got out of the blocks here. They never got a chance to get going in the WWE. And just like the Invasion, it's another one of my big regrets in wrestling. I really wish they would have been able to make this work, but I think Scott Hall was in a bad place in his life. And, Hulk Hogan being so overly beloved by the fans, it really wasn't going to work for him to be a heel like that. That left Kevin Nash, who right after that, I think, tore his quad. It was just a mess. The NWO coming in was significant for the first night and pretty cool until WrestleMania. But after that, right down the shitter. This card was loaded with matches. Might as well talk about some of these. This is your lead-in pay-per-view here to WrestleMania, and the first match they have is a tag team Turmoil match. The winner of this will face the tag team champions at WrestleMania 18. And the champions at this time currently were Taz and Spike Dudley. So the tag team Turmoil match gets started. The first team out is Christian and Lance Storm, and they're going to be taking on Scotty 2 Hotty and Prince Albert or whatever the hell they were calling him. How weird is it that when he came back as Tenzai, and then he also had a dancing gimmick with Brodus Clay. It's like they never found out what to do with poor Matt Bloom, but he made a hell of a trainer in NXT. But pretty funny to see him out there with Scotty 2 Hotty. I briefly forgot about that alliance there. But Christian and Lance Storm I loved, and they made relatively quick work of Scotty and Albert when Christian hit Scotty with the Unprettier for the win. We had the Hardy Boys out next. Now, Jim Ross was saying on commentary that they're back on TV, so I guess they were off TV for a little while. I think this was when they briefly split up, if I'm not mistaken. I think they tried to do the Hardy Boys feud. It didn't work out, and they kind of scrapped it, and now they're back on the same page here. They came out and eliminated Lance Storm and Christian after Jeff Hardy pinned Lance Storm after a Swanton Bomb. The Dudley Boys were out next. This was back when they had Stacy with them, and she looked amazing in that Dudley Boy getup. I always liked her with them. She just made a good fit somehow. I just always liked the pairing. Stacy and Lita both got involved in this thing. They started brawling with each other on the outside of the ring. Matt Hardy is able to roll up Devon and eliminate him. And after that, Jeff Hardy actually eats a 3D on the floor. So after the Dudley Boys are pinned, they attack Jeff Hardy and put him out on the outside of the ring. Billy and Chuck would come out next. Now, this was pretty early on in their run, I believe. They were kind of a newly formed tag team around this time. And it would basically be 2-on-1 when they got there because Jeff Hardy is laid out on the outside, so Billy and Chuck were able to get in the ring and pretty much have their way with Matt Hardy, which now that I think about it is a really poor choice of words. But anyway, it wouldn't take long at all for Billy Gunn to hit the Famouser on Matt Hardy and eliminate them, and that would leave the APA to be your last team out in this, and I loved these days of the APA. They were such badasses, my God. So they come storming down to the ring, and after a few minutes, I mean, the match does go on for a little while here, but you knew these two guys were going to annihilate Billy and Chuck, and they pretty much did, and what a finish. Check out this sequence by Bradshaw and Billy Gunn here when he hits the turnbuckle, bounces off the ropes, and nails Billy Gunn with an amazing clothesline from hell. Billy Gunn selling his ass off, Bradshaw covering him, and getting the 1-2-3. So the APA was on their way to WrestleMania, and you guys have to fill me in. I don't even remember what happened there. Did they face the champions? Did they win the belts? I'm not even sure what went on there at WrestleMania, but they are your winners here, and a pretty good match and a pretty fun match and an excellent opener for No Way Out. We cut backstage. We've got a Ric Flair interview with Michael Cole. He's very upset about the NWO's presence, and Flair basically calls bullshit on everything that the NWO said in their opening promo. Everybody's calling bullshit on what they said, and Ric Flair is then interrupted by The Undertaker, who says, you shouldn't be worrying about the NWO, you should be worried about other shit. So nothing too earth-shattering really took place in that interview. The next match up was Goldust versus Rob Van Dam, and I had completely forgotten about this brief program that these two guys had. They showed a replay of what led to this with Goldust attacking Rob Van Dam on Monday Night Raw. Apparently he was teasing some sort of attack or teasing some sort of a feud on TV for a couple of weeks, referring to he or referring to him, and that person or that him turned out to be Rob Van Dam. Like I said, I don't remember too much about this feud or where it went. I think it was kind of short-lived. But still, on paper, I kind of thought that this feud had potential. I thought the matches actually might be pretty good between these two. And Goldust attacks right away and clotheslines Rob Van Dam over the top rope before he has a chance to even really get in the ring. It was an okay match. The crowd was sort of into it because it was early on in the show. And it was kind of interesting to watch Dustin work with RVD. I mean, those two together, I haven't really thought about them together really ever. And I kind of forgot they even had a program here. Rob Van Dam would hit the 5-star frog splash for the win. And he was super over here. This was still before he had his custom theme made, but I do remember he had one of the pops of the night here. And like I'm going to mention here in a little while, there's a couple of instances in this pay-per-view where I thought the crowd was kind of dead. So Rob Van Dam was bona fide over around this time. He got an amazing ovation, and it was cool to see him get the victory there. Next up, we had Austin walking around backstage. The camera's cut back to him, and he is approached by the NWO. We all remember this famous segment. It's the first time ever that Steve Austin has come into contact with the NWO, and it's the first time ever that Stone Cold and Hulk Hogan, Hollywood Hulk Hogan, have been face-to-face. And still looking back, man, I'm really happy that we got The Rock and Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania the way we did. It probably, was the better decision, but I'm really surprised they didn't go with Austin and Hogan. That just seemed like your natural match there, and it would wind up leading to Stone Cold walking out of the company the night after WrestleMania, coming back and then leaving like a month later. So Austin was also kind of on his way out around this time. Really sad. But anyway, he comes into contact with the NWO. They say hello to him. Scott Hall offers him some ice cold beer. He's like, "Look, man, we brought you some beer." Austin grabs it, tosses it over his shoulder, and just stands there, basically tells him to fuck off. They get out of his way, and he walks right through him. So I remember really kind of grinding my teeth watching that segment like, holy shit, I mean, this is history right here. You young folks don't understand, this is history. It was very surreal to see Stone Cold come face-to-face with Hulk Hogan. It was one of the few times on WWE TV that we had ever seen this happen. So, I mean, I was intrigued as to what the future held for the NWO because there were so many cool matches and interactions I thought they could have. So after seeing that, I was optimistic. I remember marking out for that quite a bit. Next up, we had the tag team titles on the line champions. Taz and Spike Dudley. Kind of forgot about their brief run as champions as well, taking on Booker T and Test. So we got a severe mismatch here. However, this is a very competitive match. Crowd was kind of dead for most of it, but you had Booker T and Test, who are just two huge men, beating the fucking shit out of Spike Dudley. The poor guy survives so much punishment in this match, with Taz on the outside of the ring helpless to do anything about it. I really want the fans that sit there and thumb their noses on people like Marco Stunt and say that he's killing the business, go back and watch this match right here and tell me what the fuck is the difference between what he does and what Spike Dudley does. At least when Marco Stunt is in there, he's not winning championships and shit, and Spike Dudley was surviving an awful lot of punishment here to the point where you could claim that it's not realistic because Booker T and Test could murder this guy with their bare hands, and he's kicking out of shit. And not only would he kick out of shit, he would be able to hit Taz for the hot tag, and he would come in and clean house and eventually choke out Test with the Taz mission, and Taz and Spike Dudley would retain the tag team titles. So I thought it was a good, fun match. I've always been a huge Spike Dudley fan. I think Spike is always going to get a pass from the audience because of his insane guts and the size of his balls to take some of the bumps that he's taken. But still, when fans try to say that people like Marco Stunt aren't realistic, you need to watch some Spike Dudley matches before you make that criticism. So anyway, decent match there. Spike and Taz retain. Good for them. Next up, we've got a promo with The Rock. He's backstage talking about his match later on with The Undertaker, and basically just says he's going to beat him and kick his candy ass. I don't know why Rock thinks everybody's ass is made out of candy. I've never understood that. But anyway, Rock says he's going to win. Next up, we've got an Intercontinental title match with William Regal defending the title against Edge. Now, this is also a brass knuckles on a pole match, which is kind of strange. How many times in history has a championship been on the line and also something has been on a pole? I can't think of any other times. I mean, I'm sure they exist, but off the top of my head, I can't think of any. But it was kind of William Regal's deal back then. At first, I'm like, why are they even doing the stip? But that was kind of his gimmick, using the brass knuckles and cheating all the time and shit like that. So they decided to stick him up there on a pole, and the two guys would battle it out for the Intercontinental title. It was an okay match. Edge got busted open really early, bleeding from the mouth. Don't know if he knocked out a tooth or bit his tongue or whatever the hell he did there. It took a while, too, before either guy reached the knuckles. Both guys attempted to grab the brass knucks, but nobody really got to it for a while. So they had their little one-on-one match for a little bit. Eventually, William Regal is able to get up there and retrieve the brass knuckles, but Edge turns the tables. Regal drops the knucks, and then he ends up pulling out a second pair of knucks when the referee wasn't looking. I think he punches Edge in the stomach or in the dick or something, and then bam, nails him right in the face with the brass knucks. He goes down. William Regal covers him for the 1-2-3 and retains the title. So it was an okay deal, but it was just kind of funny how William Regal got away with the second pair of brass knucks when he got to the ring. The ref even checked him, patted him down, and somehow he was able to pull a fast one there and cheat and retain the title. So the match was okay. Not one of my favorite battles between the two, but whatever. It was what it was. Definitely better than the Duchess of Queensberry match that they had like the year before, but overall, not a spectacular match here between the two. We cut backstage again for a Kurt Angle interview, this time with Lillian Garcia, and he's talking about his match with Triple H later on, and that he's not worried at all about Stephanie McMahon being the special guest referee, which why would he? She's a heel, she's against Triple H, and she's going to do whatever she can to help out Kurt Angle in this match, so he is pretty much holding all the cards for this match later on that has Triple H's WrestleMania title shot on the line. Next up is our Rock versus Undertaker match. Now, the Undertaker had only recently turned heel around this time. This was all still pretty new. And this little feud here with The Rock, I believe all started back at the Royal Rumble when The Undertaker was eliminated by Maven. And I think The Rock was like making fun of The Undertaker, and The Undertaker would wind up costing The Rock a match against Kurt Angle that I believe had a title shot stipulation involved there. And The Rock would get his revenge by costing The Undertaker a match against Maven where he lost the hardcore title. And the hardcore title still mattered back then. And you had lead pipes on the Undertaker's side. You had steel chairs on the Rock's side. At one point, the Undertaker even tombstoned the Rock on a car in the backstage area. All sorts of shit going on between these two guys on TV, leading to this one-on-one match. Rock is pissed off. He wants revenge. Undertaker comes out to the ring first. Rock's music hits, and he sprints right down to the ring. Immediately starts brawling with the Undertaker. Pretty decent match between these two guys. I mean, we've seen a lot of the Undertaker and Rock matches, and this one, was no better or worse, I don't think, than any of them. All sorts of interference in here, too, because the Undertaker is riding the bike to the ring, and he's got a lead pipe hidden in the bike, so he pulls out the lead pipe at one point, and that's when Ric Flair comes out to stop him, because Ric Flair and Taker were kind of feuding a little bit, too. They would have their WrestleMania match at WrestleMania 18 as well. But Taker is able to fight off Ric Flair, get in the ring, but The Rock turns the tables and puts the Undertaker in the sharpshooter. That's when Vince McMahon comes out to the ring. So you got Flair and Vince out there. He tries to interfere, but The Rock just completely kicks Vince McMahon's ass. Undertaker goes for the tombstone, but Ric Flair hits him with the lead pipe, allowing The Rock to hit the Undertaker with the rock bottom for the win. So there was a lot going on there. This feud kind of felt like it was just a time-killing feud for both guys, because Taker was setting up his Mania match with Ric Flair, and Rock would set up his Mania match with Hogan the next night. Pretty short program between the two, and it was pretty much over with after this, unless they worked on Raw prior to WrestleMania, but I don't think they did. So that match is done. Next up, we cut to WWF New York. Curt Hennig, who just passed away, the anniversary of his death was just a few days ago, and he's been dead for 17 years. He would be dead less than 1 year later. He would be dead 51 weeks after his appearance here at WWF New York, and he would also be let go, I believe, after the plane ride from hell in just a few months. And it's a shame. Curt still looked incredible I mean, given his age, he still was in really good shape, and he was showing himself off. He was wearing a leather jacket with no shirt on underneath it, and saying, hey, check out the goods and shit. So it's just really a shame that he died so incredibly young. Would have loved to see him work a few more years in WWE. He came back at the Royal Rumble, and he was gone, I think, by May of that year. So it was a short comeback for him, and Mr. Perfect was one of my favorites, and it's just still a sore subject for me, that he's gone and no longer with us, because I really liked Kurt Hennig. Next up is our Triple H versus Kurt Angle match. This, of course, is for Triple H's title shot that he earned at the Royal Rumble. That would be on the line here, and this is something that we've seen them do many times. I mean, the first time they did it that I can remember was with Shawn Michaels when he won in 1996, and then he would put that title shot on the line against Owen Hart at In Your House. So this was a very common thing to do here, but they kind of swerved us here on this one in this match, which I did like. Now, there's a lot going on here, too, because Stephanie McMahon is the special referee. So this was right after Triple H came back at the Royal Rumble, came back as a babyface. He left as a heel, but fans missed him so much, he came back in January at that big Raw in Madison Square Garden that just blew the roof off the place. One of the loudest ovations to this day that the professional wrestling industry has ever seen was that night in Madison Square Garden for Triple H. So he's now back as a monster babyface, but his on-screen wife is a dirty, vicious heel. So what do you do there? And I remember when he came back wondering, I'm like, they're going to have to split up. They're not going to be able to stay together like this. This dynamic is not going to work if WWE wants to push Triple H as a babyface. But Stephanie has got so much real, genuine heel heat that there's just no way those two can stay together. So they do the whole deal where he comes back and Stephanie wants to renew their wedding vows, and he says no. He's very resistant to anything involving Stephanie, and that's when she reveals that she's pregnant. And that's when Triple H does a complete 180. He hugs her, he smiles, he's overjoyed and overwhelmed with happiness, and I guess he agrees to renew his wedding vows with Stephanie on Raw. That's when they do the big wedding, and Stephanie comes out there in the dress, and Vince is out there. But prior to that, when Triple H is getting ready, he's approached by Arn Anderson, who gives him a videotape. This whole thing is so convoluted. And he puts the tape in, and he calls Linda McMahon on the phone, and you can hear Linda's voice like over the TV, which is weird. And she reveals to Triple H that Stephanie has been lying to her, or lying to him, and the doctor they got was an actor, and all this shit, because they did a segment too where they had a doctor and an ultrasound and the whole deal. So Stephanie fabricated the whole thing. Linda spills the beans to Triple H right before he's about to go out and renew his wedding vows with Stephanie. Reveals that he knew that she was lying, calls her a bitch, and tears apart, the whole wedding set and walks away. And that's when Stephanie does that classic roar, that scream right into the camera with that big angry face of hers. Great shit. So now she is a woman scorned, which I believe Jerry Lawler said like 155 times on this pay-per-view over and over and over again. She's a woman scorned. Yes, we get it, Jerry Lawler. She is scorned. Now, I like what they did in this match, because she's the special guest referee, so obviously she's going to do everything in her power to fuck over Triple H, but they got her out of the match early, which was smart. Within the first few minutes, she takes a bump. Angle actually clotheslines her over the top rope, which is just hilarious to see. I don't know why. So she's out for the count, and she's escorted to the backstage area, and Timmy White comes out to replace her, one of Tim White's very last appearances as a referee. I think by the time they got to June, or that Hell in the Cell match, he would injure his shoulder. Timmy White's refereeing career was just about over around this time, which always makes me sad. So he came out there to replace her, which is smart. That allowed Triple H and Kurt Angle to be able to have a match without a clunky-ass referee in there. So Angle would later nail Tim White, like on purpose, knock him out of the match, and low blow Triple H, and then nail him with an Angle slam. And then Stephanie reappears, after the guys have had a few minutes to wrestle in there. She comes out in the end to count the 3, but Triple H kicks out not once, but twice. Or actually, I think 3 times. He kicks out of all 3 attempts to pin him by Stephanie. And by the way, Stephanie sucks at counting. I can see why. they got her out of this match early because she's not a very good special guest referee. I mean, not many people are. Vince, I always thought, was terrible, but, her timing with the counts and everything was so bad, and I'm glad the WWE realized this and they did the angle to get her out of the match for most of it, and then she can come back and be involved in the finish there. So she goes down again when Triple H pushes Kurt Angle right into her, into the corner, and she kind of gets sandwiched and goes down. And that's when Kurt Angle goes for a steel chair. Triple H ducks the chair, winds up hitting Kurt Angle with the pedigree, at which point Tim White starts coming to, and he's going to count the 3 count, but Stephanie breaks that up by dropping an elbow on Tim White and kicking him in the dick. So this infuriates Triple H. He gets up, grabs Stephanie McMahon by the hair, and he's about to hit her with the pedigree when Kurt Angle comes from behind, hits him with the steel chair, and nails him with the angle slam and allows Stephanie to count the 1, 2, 3, and Kurt Angle defeats Triple H and wins his title shot. Now, again, my memory is hazy. I don't remember how they reconciled this because Triple H would still go on to face Chris Jericho at WrestleMania, so I don't know if they did a rematch on Raw or if maybe Ric Flair got involved here and changed the stipulation. You guys have to inform me in the comments below. How did Triple H get his title shot back? I actually don't remember, but I enjoyed the match. They went in a direction we didn't expect them to go. Triple H had recently returned onto the scene here. You would think he was just going to go on a tear and win all of his matches, but he really didn't. And when you think about it, Triple H did not have a very successful comeback. He won the Royal Rumble and he won the title. But everything in between and after that sucked because he lost here at No Way Out. And then in his very first title defense after he defeated Chris Jericho at WrestleMania, he would lose to Hulk Hogan. And then he would turn heel and have his feud with Shawn Michaels. So kind of an interesting year of 2002 for Triple H and all of the different things that he did. But Kurt Angle gets the victory here. They even show him outside the arena. He busts through the door, still in his gear. He goes out the back door and gets in his car and drives away, celebrating that he's now going to WrestleMania to take on the winner of Stone Cold Steve Austin and Chris Jericho. We cut backstage again to the NWO, who approaches The Rock. He's in the trainer's room, icing up after his match with The Undertaker. And this is another pretty funny and famous backstage segment, one of my favorites, involving The Rock. Hulk Hogan asks The Rock for a picture for his son, and Rock's like, all right, fine. They take a picture, and then Hogan mumbles something under his breath, some sort of an insult, and that's when Rock's like, whoa. What'd you just say? And then he goes, I got an idea for you. Why don't you take that camera and give it to the bad guy. Give it to Razor Ramon, Chico. And then he says, and then you shine it up and pass it to Big Daddy Cool Diesel. And he does the which is, every time he does that, I fucking laugh my ass off. And he tells Diesel to polish it up real nice and then hand it to Hogan. And Hogan, of course, has got to stick it straight up his candy ass. So The Rock completely owns all 3 of them and storms away. Very good stuff there. And we would see what Rock and Hogan would go on to do at WrestleMania 18. Pretty epic shit. We now are on to the main event. Chris Jericho defending his undisputed title, or titles, Jericho 2 belts, you could call him, against Stone Cold Steve Austin. Now, this was a pretty good match, but I felt like the crowd was kind of dead. And it was really interesting how this almost paralleled the previous year, because if you remember back in 2001, it was The Rock that got the title shot at No Way Out, and it was Austin that won the Royal Rumble. And I always thought that they kind of missed an opportunity here to do a big Stone Cold Steve Austin and Triple H match. Now, I know they had already had the big feud, when Triple H was behind Austin getting run over. But after that, they were able to join forces and form the 3-man power trip with Vince McMahon. And that was the last time we saw Triple H on TV as Stone Cold Steve Austin's tag team championship partner in that match with Jericho and Benoit. And Triple H would tear his quad and be out for all those months. So here, you kind of have a similar situation. You've got Triple H winning the Royal Rumble. I don't want to leave Chris Jericho out in the dust or anything here. I'm really happy that he won at Vengeance, but I kind of feel like you would have had Austin win the title here, just like The Rock did at No Way Out, and then go on to face Triple H at WrestleMania, Austin and Triple H. Now, again, much like 17, it would be another babyface match, but this time, it's Austin putting someone over. He took the belt from The Rock the year before, and maybe this time he can pass the belt to Triple H, giving Triple H a humongous WrestleMania victory, coming back as this triumphant babyface and defeating Stone Cold Steve Austin. Maybe the fans wouldn't have cheered that. The dynamic there wouldn't have worked. But in storyline, it made perfect sense. But with the NWO coming in, that changed all of that. That put Rock on a path with Hulk Hogan, and Triple H on a path with Chris Jericho, and Austin on a path with Scott Hall. So, it is kind of interesting how they could have gone in a similar route that they did the year before with Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin. So anyway, just something I was thinking about there as I was rewatching this match back. It was a pretty good match and everything, but like I said earlier, I still feel like the crowd was a little bit dead for this one. I mean, Stone Cold still got his big Steve Austin pop, don't get me wrong, but the match itself, I didn't really feel like the fans were on the edge of their seat. I know I wasn't on the edge of mine, because you kind of felt like the writing was on the wall. Jericho was going to be going to WrestleMania, although I think it would have been cool, if they had Austin win the belt here. You really weren't feeling it. So after they have their match, you get to the end, the referee takes a bump, and Austin hits Chris Jericho with the Stone Cold Stunner, but there's nobody to count the 3 count. And almost immediately upon hitting the stunner, Austin is facing the aisleway, and he sees the NWO coming back out. Hall, Nash, and Hogan reappear. They hit the ring. Austin is already on his feet. He knows what they're there to do, and he's fighting them off. And he meets Scott Hall and Kevin Nash with some punches, and he does a pretty good job of fighting them off for a little while, but eventually the numbers game catches up to Steve, and the NWO is able to pounce on him, leave him laying, and they leave the ring just as the referee is coming to, and Jericho crawls on top of Steve Austin to get the 1, 2, 3 and retain the undisputed championship. So Jericho is now on to WrestleMania, and that leaves Austin in the ring, a beaten man all by himself, and the NWO comes back to finish the job and all of that. So that's how the pay-per-view went off the air, with the NWO making a big statement, opening up the show, claiming they're just there, they want an opportunity and a fair shake, and their feelings are hurt that the fans think they're there to cause any trouble, and then they come here and they screw over royally Stone Cold Steve Austin, and that, of course, would lead to your Steve Austin and Scott Hall match. Now, looking back on all of this, I still kind of wish we would have gotten that Austin and Hogan match. It would have been so fucking epic, but considering the way the fans were, they were so happy to have Hogan back, that you wouldn't have wanted to put Austin in that situation. I mean, he was such an over babyface. He still probably would have been cheered more than Hogan, or at least as much. But you got to remember, number one, they were in Toronto for WrestleMania, and that crowd was absolutely out of their minds. And Austin was just off the heels of a heel turn, or a heel run in the company. 2 months prior to this, he was a chicken shit heel. So maybe some of that was still lingering with the audience, and WWE and Vince didn't want to put Austin in that position where he's going to be booed as a babyface against Hulk Hogan. That would have sucked. I wouldn't have wanted to see that either. So with The Rock, it was a little bit easier, and it made for a great WrestleMania match and a great WrestleMania moment. But you always have to wonder what might have been had they gone in a number of different directions that they could have for WrestleMania 18. But overall, I think No Way Out 2002 was a decent show. I think the year before was also good with the 3 Stages of Hell match. The year and The Rock winning the title. They've had some good No Way Outs throughout the years. Where this one stands, and compares to the others, I don't really know. That's a call for you guys to make. But I thought this was a pretty decent show. A lot of strong matches. I mean, when you look at this card on paper, Rock, Undertaker, Angle, Triple H, Austin, Jericho, and the NWO was there. That's no shortage of talent right there. That's some pretty big names leading in to WrestleMania 18. So that is pretty much a wrap on No Way Out 2002. Let me know what you guys remember of this show, or your opinions of it, or help me out with some of my memory problems, because I can't remember how Triple H got that title shot back against Jericho. So hit me with all that stuff in the comments below, and it'll be interesting to see the NWO go into the Hall of Fame this year. It's a 4-man group. They're adding X-Pac to that, which is a bit controversial, I will admit that. I'm a big Sean Waltman fan. I think he's awesome, so I'm happy for him, but I do understand the criticisms of why he's in there. To me, he doesn't seem necessary. It should just be the 3 guys. And if you are going to add a 4th, it should be Bischoff, or it should be somebody that got there before Sean Waltman. I think even Ted DiBiase was in the NWO before Waltman was. So, he was a part of both versions, though, WWE and WWF, or WWE and WCW. But still, it's kind of weird that he is stuck in there. I believe it should just be the 3 main members. So I want to thank you guys again for spending time with me this evening and taking a look back at this awesome pay-per-view. And I will catch you real soon for another classic pay-per-view review. Y'all be good. Peace.